Good morning, everyone. I just got back from Dragon Con, where I learned neat stuff about everything from Lon Chaney Sr., the man with a thousand faces, to the Bride of Frankenstein, to the 1995 and 2005 adaptations of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, to theatrical pro shots, to just about anything and everything I might be interested in. Perhaps the highlight was my husband and my getting our picture taken with Dave Goles. No, that's not the highlight. The highlight was actually hearing him and a number of other Muppet professionals give a panel. No, that's not the high point. The high point was the absolutely slamming performances of the Atlanta Radio Theater Company. Well, a lot of highlights. So, I would do a more detailed Dragon Con post-mortem, and that may happen a little bit later, but I want to get back to my 1930s series because today I want to talk about my top 5 science fiction fantasy movies of the 1930s. Now, this is a top 5 rather than a top 10, largely because a lot of things that might be considered sci-fi tended to go in a horror direction. The Invisible Man, for example. People could talk about that as a horror film or a science fiction film. Even Frankenstein, there's a case to be made for including Frankenstein as sci-fi rather than horror. But since I already talked about those films in my horror videos, I have to limit this particular list to the 5 movies that don't really belong in any other categories. So here goes. And these are in no particular order, just the order in which I thought of them. So first off, 1935's adaptation of William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. So this is special to me partly because A Midsummer Night's Dream was my first experience ever with Shakespeare when I was a kid, just 10 years old. My parents were involved in a production of this, and I had a little tiny part as a fairy. And I got to cue my dad, particularly because he was playing Duke Theseus of Athens, I got to cue him on his lines. And I learned about Shakespearean language and Greek mythology all at the same time. It was an awesome spring season when that was going on. So I have a soft spot for the play. And this is Warner Brothers injecting a little bit of Busby Berkeley magic into Shakespeare. So you got 4 plots woven together. First of all, you have Duke Theseus preparing for his wedding to Queen Hippolyta of the Amazons. Then you have the plot of 4 mismatched lovers. Helena loves Demetrius, who loves Hermia, who loves Lysander, but whose father is making her marry Demetrius. And then you have a group of working class men trying to rehearse a play that they're going to put on at the wedding. And the king and queen of the fairies are fighting over who's going to have charge of a changeling boy. Did you get that? Did you get that? It's super confusing, but it's also delightful. So you get a lot of wonderful, eerie fantasy touches throughout this. And it's got a decent cast. It's got a good cast, including people that you wouldn't expect to do well in Shakespeare. James Cagney plays the role of Bottom, the main member of the rustics who are rehearsing for this play. And casting Cagney as Bottom was actually revolutionary in more ways than one, because prior to this, Bottom had always been played by older men, middle-aged men. So Cagney was the first young man to play this role, and it's been played at various times by different young men ever since. And if you don't think that, you know Cagney primarily for his gangster films like The Public Enemy, but if you don't think that James Cagney is actually such a good actor that he can do almost anything, take a look at A Midsummer Night's Dream. So that definitely has a spot in my top 5. Next, we're going to veer in a more science fiction direction with 1936's Things to Come, which is, for me, 2/3 of a great film and 1/3 of an okay for its time but really dated film. So, this science fiction film based on an H.G. Wells novel, it's set in a place called Everytown in 1940. You get the first scene of 1940, and it's set at the Christmas holidays, and everybody's going around shopping for Christmas gifts, singing Christmas carols. Meanwhile, you keep seeing billboards and headlines warning that war is coming. And in fact, war does come, but it doesn't stop. The war just goes on and on and on and on for decades. And in the end, civilization as we know it is destroyed, at least temporarily. And you get the emergence of a strong man, a chief, whose basic pattern of leadership is to bully and browbeat everybody who disagrees with him. But wisdom and science eventually do prevail over this chief. And the last third gives us a glimpse at civilization far into the future, where we have space travel and a kind of utopian society where everybody pretty much wears the same outfits. I wonder why it is that in utopian societies everybody dresses the same. But there it is. And this last section, the far future section, to me is where the movie falls down a little bit. It's where instead of dialogue between characters, you start to get characters exchanging speeches. So that could be a little off-putting, but it's still fascinating to watch. It's fascinating to see what the future looked like through the eyes of filmmakers in the year 1936. Raymond Massey is quite good in his role. Ralph Richardson, who plays the chief, he probably comes off best. And it is worth a look. It will disturb you. It will puzzle you. And all in all, it's a good experience. So now for my third choice. And again, these are in no particular order. 1937's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, aka the first American animated feature film. And I don't think I have to talk all that much about Snow White because most of you have probably seen it already. And yes, like most of the films on this list, it is dated. You have the character of Snow White speaking in rhymes, which characters in cartoon shorts often did back in those days. You also have a maybe questionable casting choice for Snow White in that she sounds a little bit too uncanny valley. And it's a shame to think of what might have happened if Disney had cast Deanna Durbin instead, because she wanted to do it, but he decided against her doing it because she sounded, quote, too mature, when she was actually the same age that the character of Snow White was supposed to be. And, of course, you get the slapstick humor and the charm of the dwarves. But for me, the real selling point of this movie is the evil queen. She has this wonderful presence and a wonderful voice provided by character actress Lucille Laverne. And when I was young and saw this on the big screen for the first time, the scene of her transformation absolutely terrified me. And as usual, things that terrified me back then fascinate me now. Next on the list is Lost Horizon with Ronald Colman. Again, it's got Ronald Colman in it, so That automatically raises it a little bit in my estimation over what it would have been without him. Made in 1937 by Frank Capra. A lot of footage is lost, but recent DVD releases and Blu-ray releases have tried to cobble together a bunch of stills to fill in the gaps. And it is, of course, if you recognize the title, it's about a group of Westerners who stumble into a utopian society. In this case, they're not all dressed the same, but you've got Ronald Colman playing the diplomat, Thomas Mitchell playing the grifter. You've got an actor whose name I forget and I'm not going to look up right now playing Ronald Colman's brother. You get a prostitute and you get a paleontologist. 5 people. All of them become changed, transformed by this world that they've entered, except Ronald Colman's brother. He's the holdout. And in the end, he manages to pull his brother away from this utopia. So it is a fascinating look. And sometimes, again, the word dated is entering this conversation. It's a little bit dated in terms of what a utopia would look and be like. But it's well acted. Thomas Mitchell is great in his supporting role. And Edward Everett Horton, who plays the paleontologist, is also very good. Ronald Colman is charismatic as always. Jane Wyatt is charming as the girl he falls in love with. And you have H.B. Warner and Sam Jaffe playing elder statesmen in this utopia. Very good performances there. So it is worth a look. Avoid the 1970s musical at all costs. And then finally, I said they were in no particular order, but this one, I guess, has to occupy the top spot. And that is The Wizard of Oz. And there isn't a lot that I can say about The Wizard of Oz that has not already been said. Everything just hits. The performances of Judy Garland, Burt Lahr, Jack Haley, Ray Bolger, and Margaret Hamilton. The songs by Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg. And the wonderful Technicolor world that Judy Garland's Dorothy, steps into. And it is, again, the word dated comes to mind. One thing that disappoints me about stories of girls going on a journey is that they always end up back home. When young boys go off on a journey, they very often stay on the journey. They strike out for parts unknown. They don't necessarily come back home. The boy leaves home trope. But the girls, Alice and Wendy, they always seem to end up back at home. But it still works. It still works beautifully. And it is interesting that Dorothy leads through kindness, that she gathers this team around her who will help her by being kind to each one of them, by stopping to help them out. This is very much typical of the fairy tale hero on a quest. They gather their allies by being the ones that will stop on the road to help out somebody in trouble. So I love that aspect of the film. And those are my top 5 science fiction fantasy films of the 1930s. Next time, I'm going to switch gears and talk about my top 5 favorite issue movies or realistic movies of the 1930s. So I'm going to take you completely the other way. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you have a viewpoint to share or a question. And see you next time.